We're joined now by columnist Dan Bernstein. Dan,
Yes.
welcome aboard
Thank
here.
you.
It's been an interesting, I don't know, 12, 15, 16 hours.
Yeah,
I know you've been following measures L&M closely with the Riverside County race.
Right.
Pension and benefits reform, if you will. You have an immediate reaction as it appears that both of these measures appear to be passing, which I find a little bit confusing, but maybe you can shed some light on that.
Well, not much, I'm afraid. I guess probably just to back up a little bit, I'm a little bit surprised. I feel kind of like Snoopy with the football. I kind of thought we'd have some final results by now, but you know, it just seems that the registrar's a little snake bit again, and the results are kind of trickling in, so I'd like to be more definitive. I guess you could say that it looks like both of those measures are going to pass, and it looks like Measure M is going to get more votes than Measure L, which means that that would be the prevailing measure. Measure M is the measure, the pension measure the Board of Supervisors put on the ballot in kind of retaliation to
and I see you have a couple flyers there for
I do.
Supporters of Measure L, it appears, based on the stash of money there.
I brought some visual aids only to show kind of what mailboxes were flooded with, or maybe remind people what mailboxes were flooded with over the last couple of weeks. This is a pro Measure L.
There you go, right there. There you go.
Pro Measure L mailer, and you're very hard pressed to find the word pension in front or back. Here's another one too. The strategy seemed to be to talk about anything except pensions, and that actually might have hurt the campaign. I don't know that voters knew what they were voting on. Were they voting to protect widows and orphans? Were they voting to deprive Supervisor Bob Buster of a so-called gold-plated pension? Or were they voting for pensions? And I think that probably the message is a little bit muddled there. It's going to be kind of tough for us to analyze who is really voting for this thing. Interestingly, it seems that the people who spent really $750,000, maybe $250,000, I think, or more, on getting this measure, putting this measure up and hoping to get it through, didn't spend much time campaigning against Measure M. And that might prove to be some kind of a tactical mistake, because I think voters kind of saw maybe what was going on.
And the difference in wording, really, it's like two words, you know, very confusing to the voters. So, you know, it may well have been a case where not enough clarity in the minds of the voters. Right.
I think so. And I want to keep coming back. This is the second election. Well, we've had a lot of elections that have been pretty nasty. But the DA's race was pretty nasty in June. And this race is pretty nasty as well. And I think part of this vote no on Measure L was a response to that. I think people, I think it's a legitimate debate, and it's a debate that the sheriffs and the other unions and the supervisors are going to have starting very soon about these pensions. But this debate was not engaged by the proponents of Measure L at all. I think that it was tried, maybe they figured they couldn't win by talking about pensions, maybe they thought it was a loser, and so they had to go after, again, I raised this to show you that one of the people on this brochure is ex-city manager of Bell, Mr. Rizzo. His face here looks like, I think I wrote that it looks like a mudslide, which is actually kind of consistent with the campaign they waged.
Sure.
But it was just not a very honestly engaged election, and I think in the end voters are pretty smart, and I think they caught on to that, and it looks like Measure M will probably win.
Well, you know, and actually, just as somebody who is witness to the negativity and the negative ads on TV, I hope that's the case. We saw in the city of Paris where, you know, somebody put out a flyer that said that, you know, one of the council members had a record of spousal abuse, which was wrong. It was somebody with a similar name but a different age, as the candidate, as the incumbent pointed out. different age person, anybody with half a brain could have figured out that this was not the same person. Negative campaigning throughout, whether it was in Lake Elsinore, as in Menifee, where there was a pretty nasty race. Really, the tones of local elections have in some ways begun to mirror and take on what we've seen on TV. And Lord knows we've had no shortage of negative ads on TV with the senatorial race and the gubernatorial race.
Over the weekend, my wife was going through one of our drawers in the kitchen, and she pulled out an old pot holder, and it was Governor George Deukmejian endorses, I think it was Gil Oliveria, who was running for the legislature at the time. That's how they used to campaign around here, pot holders. And I remember one of the assemblymen, deceased Walt Ingalls, always had a pot holder for his campaigns, and he would tell me, this is the one they keep. This is what I remember.
Yep.
And now we get this kind of stuff that is really very the quality of this paper is high grade. It costs a lot to produce something like this. If you've got an organization that's representing you and you know they're pouring nearly $1 million into the campaign and coming up with stuff like this and not winning, maybe it's time to go back to the potholder and debate that way. At least it'll be a little more sane.
Sure. Now, what else strikes you from what you've witnessed this election season?
Well, I think the Democratic capturing of the governorship and Barbara Boxer's retention of the Senate fascinates me a little bit. And I think a lot of people are, the quick analysis of which, I'm certainly a part, would say, well, the Democrats buck the trend, and we've got the Democrats back in power or taking the governor's mansion. But I think in some ways you can also read it that voters got tired of the CEO type of campaign. We've tried that with Governor Schwarzenegger. It didn't seem to work. The person who rides in on the white horse and says, I want to run this place like a business. And it just didn't seem to ring true with voters. We almost tried that, and now, ironically, going to not the young and the restless, but a very seasoned, older guy, politician, to run the state, who's been around the block a few times.
Yeah, and is running on "I'm different now."
And I'm different now. You got it. That will remain to be seen.
At this age of my, whatever, I can't remember the phrase he tossed out there, but it was an unusual phrase to hear in a gubernatorial campaign.
But these are, I want to emphasize, these are people who are not newcomers. They are entrenched politicians. That's the only way you can describe them, and they beat the CEO prototypes that were going to turn the state around. And I just think voters didn't buy it, and I think it was maybe a little bit more than that. I think the personalities got into it too. I think Meg Whitman probably hurt herself with the housekeeper issue, the way she handled that, and I think people may have taken a look at her as a person. They didn't know her too well, and maybe how she handled that, both from the left and the right, might have affected her campaign quite a bit too.
Could be. A couple other interesting things to ponder too. In the propositions, we're saying, okay, let's make it easier to pass a budget. On the other hand, we're saying you can't take money from local, so we're making it harder for them to get the budget done. At the same time, you have in some of these local races, time and time again, the voters said, we want to limit the potential power of our city councils. So whether it be term limits passed in several areas, limiting executive pay passed in a couple, in Murrieta, which is going to be interesting. So I think we've seen these tough economic times that you need to take care of business and balance city budgets, or you may not be around, or you certainly are not going to be able to be around for a long time. So one things I've seen is just sort of the electorate basically saying, we're going to kind of limit the extent of power we're giving to any individuals on any local councils.
I think you're right. I think it's a function of the economy, and I also think it's this fallout from the Bell story that just everyone can identify with that. It's not as sort of an esoteric earmark or defense expenditure. It's city councilmen, it's city managers, It's people who are they're the essence of the retail politics of people you know, you elect, they're in your ward, they represent your wards. You know these people, and I think you're right. Maybe it's for too long, they maybe not getting away, but they have maybe not been subject to the same kind of scrutiny as some of the bigger political big shots have been.
Even to the extent that in several cities, voters turned down the opportunity to appoint city attorneys and city treasurers. There was an appointed city treasurer in the city of Bell, basically saying, no, we want to have the capability of a watchdog there. And of course, Proposition 19, we're not going to have legalized marijuana. You know, we're going to continue with our environmental protection law, AB 32, but you know, I guess we're crazy Californians, but we're not that crazy.
We're kind of schizophrenic. I mean, the ones that you mentioned, I think, you know, saying we're going to pass this budget with a simple majority, but you can't take this and you can't take that. That's kind of that's sort of emblematic of the initiative process, I think. One other thing I think is kind of interesting, and I think it goes to publications like ours and daily newspapers around the country. As things have changed and we've had to sort of begin to reorient ourselves to our subscribers and our listeners and readers, we've gotten more and more intensely local in our coverage. And I know there was a time when the LA Times, which broke the Bell story, was accused of not covering.
Well, they didn't cover Bell for, it happened under their watch.
Right.
So they broke it, but it also happened under their watch.
Exactly. But now I think with this sort of re-emphasis on local, those kind of stories are, I think, are going to come to the fore. You're going to see a lot more of them. A lot more of them.
And I can assure you that I know a heck of a lot more about local politics after having conducted 24 candidate forums across western Riverside County in 5 days in early October. That's as provincial as you get when you're getting into the Calamasa Council candidate forum and you're talking about the Lake Elsinore School Board race and you're talking about the Canyon Lake. It was a blast doing it. We learned a lot, and you're exactly right. You know, we were in those communities and we were engaging, and what we saw in San Jacinto, 16 people running for council. In Hemet, you see people who are passionate about their communities. They see tough times. They're willing to be part of the solutions. You know, it sounds corny, but it is democracy at work. And when times are tough, people do step up. So I was encouraged by the whole thing. All right,
okay,
Dan, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
We've been hearing from Dan Bernstein, the columnist here at the Press Enterprise. You, of course, can follow his work in the newspaper and also on pe.com. Louis, what do you want to do now? We're going to take a quick break. Thank you, Dan, and we'll be back in just a minute.